This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Coronavirus cases rise to 41 in Africa, plus the latest updates from around the world. One police officer killed and 4 others wounded in suicide blast near to the US Embassy in Tunisia. And Cote d'Ivoire president says he won't stand in October election. Hello and welcome to Africa Live, only on CGTN. I'm Karen Roberts in Nairobi. Rama joins me now with all your business headlines.
That's right, Karen. Here's what's coming up in business. 5 Kenyan banks have fined nearly $4 million for failing to report suspicious transactions. And Nigeria's Senate has approved President Muhammadu Buhari's request to borrow nearly $23 billion to fund infrastructure. We'll have the details on those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Karen.
Thank you, Rama. We begin with a look at how the virus has been spreading in Africa. The number of confirmed cases on the continent has now risen to 41 after Togo just announced its first confirmed case. The patient is a 42-year-old woman who had travelled to Benin, Germany, Turkey and France. On Friday, Cameroon also reported its first case. Egypt has recorded 12 more cases, raising the number in the country to a total of 14. Algeria remains the worst affected African nation with 17 cases. An Italian man and 16 members of the same family tested positive for the virus. Senegal has 4. South Africa announced its first case on Thursday. Tunisia, Morocco and Nigeria have reported a single case each. And around the world, here are the latest figures for the coronavirus epidemic. China has reported new infections coming from other countries. They've been confirmed in areas outside Hubei province, the outbreak's epicenter. 27 new cases have been confirmed in 6 regions across the country. 21 of them came from abroad. Within Hubei itself, there are 126 new cases, all in the capital Wuhan. There are now 80,000 confirmed cases in China and nearly 20,000 cases in more than 80 countries all over the world. Well, after China, South Korea has the highest number of cases with nearly 6,600 infections. Iran is the worst hit country in the Middle East. It's reported more than 1,000 new cases, bringing the total to over 4,700. In Europe, Italy has seen 3,900 cases and over 100 deaths. It's the largest outbreak on the continent. 4 medical teams from the Peking Union Medical College Hospital are in Wuhan to help treat the most severe cases. Our reporter Tang Bo has been finding out what they've learned about the disease.
Doctors from the Peking Union Medical College Hospital are checking on a patient recovering from COVID-19 at Wuhan's Tongji Hospital. The one severely ill patient has regained consciousness and is able to move.
It is vital to give severely ill patients mechanical ventilation and oxygen support in time. The treatment must be done early and fast.
Antiviral and anti-inflammatory therapies and multiple organ support are also needed. And the details of treatment plays an important role in deciding whether patients improve.
Take the management of blood pressure, blood volume, and blood sugar, for example. A good handling of these details will protect the patient's other organs and further create conditions for long recovery.
As we follow the doctors making their rounds, we discover that some patients' fingertips and toes have turned purple or even black.
This symptom with black fingertips is caused by severe blood clotting, which can happen as a result of various diseases. It is a condition called disseminated intravascular coagulation, or DIC. It is commonly seen in patients who are very gravely ill. But for the first time, doctors from Peking Union Medical College Hospital found that it has a direct link with the new virus.
It's normal to see this in dying patients, but the doctors from Beijing also found the symptom in moderate infections.
Later on, we found some patients' life was fine. In other words, some of them just started to use ventilators or take high-flow oxygen when their fingertips and toes became cold. Some turned purple, when the worst cases turning black.
The medical team concluded that COVID-19 can damage the blood circulation system and cause clotting. They've turned to blood specialists at the Beijing headquarters and have started to take anti-blood clotting precautions for their patients.
Fingers and toes are easy to observe, and the effect of the treatment is easy to see from the outside. More importantly, the same thing is happening to organs that we can't see from the outside.
In the first 2 weeks after the first medical team's arrival, severe cases that were moved to ICU survived only 3 days on average. But after adopting the anti-blood clotting treatment, doctors here have been able to extend lives of the critically ill for 2 or 3 weeks.
新冠肺炎导致的这个
We have never experienced COVID-19 before, but the changes of body functions caused by the virus are not new, so patients can be treated even though there isn't a cure. Our basic medical skills, along with a thorough understanding of body functions, can help us win the battle against the virus.
The medical teams now have a new understanding of patient management. They are concentrating their efforts on treating patients in critical condition, but they are also studying the progression of the illness to learn how to prevent mild cases becoming severe. Tang Bo, CGTN, Wuhan, Hubei Province.
Meanwhile, at a press conference in Beijing, the Chinese government has been speaking about efforts to develop a vaccine and drugs to treat the virus. Let's now take a look at some of the main points. China has been working on 5 different types of vaccine. Some of them are expected to go into clinical trials next month. Chinese scientists are also developing new test kits, which should take 30 minutes to show results. That's faster than ever before. 5 different kinds of drugs and treatment are already being used. Among them, the arthritis drug tocilizumab has been proved to be very effective. 20 severely ill patients took the medicine, and 19 of them were discharged from hospital in 2 weeks. The Chinese General Administration of Customs says it has uncovered a major wildlife smuggling ring. The case found 12 people suspected of smuggling gecko-related products. It also detailed 20.3 tons of wildlife products. Some experts believe the coronavirus outbreak originates from wild animals. Since the start of the outbreak, President Xi Jinping has called for a crackdown on illegal wildlife trading and abolishing the habit of consuming wild animals. Well, according to the General Administration of Customs, the Chinese Customs uncovered nearly 470 wildlife smuggling cases and seized nearly 1,240 tons of products in 2019. That's an 8-fold increase year on year. Following the initial coronavirus cases in Nigeria, many institutions have adopted safety measures to curb the spread of the disease. Schools and churches were among the first to take precautionary measures. Here's CGTN's Deju Badmus with more on that story.
It's a new norm across most schools in Lagos, especially the private ones. The last time we saw anything like this was in the wake of the outbreak of the Ebola virus in the city in 2014. But with the announcement of Nigeria's first COVID-19 case, the practice is back. One after the other, students of this school are screened with a temperature scanner and given hand sanitizers to apply before they are allowed into the school premises. The school adopted these safety measures just a day after health authorities confirmed an Italian national who was visiting the city on a business trip had been diagnosed with COVID-19.
We have wash hand basins installed all over the compound, even our car park, as you can see. We screen every visitor, including our students, teachers, staff, everybody is screened. We have also been lecturing our students. They are being tutored on hygiene. Every morning we talk to them on how to take precautionary measure against all this. They wash their hands and all of that. We have flyers for them too.
We have also educated the students on the need to distance themselves from other students who are coughing or who are exhibiting any sign of upper respiratory tract infections like sneezing, coughing, like I said. So if any of those things is happening to the students, you are expected to quickly come to the school clinic and see the doctor.
As it is with schools, so it is with churches. Hand sanitizers are now placed at the entrance of some churches, like this Catholic church. Worshippers are advised to use them before stepping into the church. As for the measures to curtail any spread of the virus, the Bishop of the Catholic Church in Lagos has since announced the suspension of certain church rites, among them the traditional shaking of hands during church service.
He asked us to remove all holy water containers, fonts, to remove water from them so that people don't use it as a public thing. Because normally, if you are coming into the church, you dip your hand in the holy water font and make the sign of the cross. Communion that is normally given to the people through their mouth is now received on the palm. The Stations of the Cross we normally have twice in a week during Lent. That's Wednesdays and Fridays. He has decided to make it once.
The actions of these institutions have helped in raising the level of awareness of COVID-19 in the city. On its part, the government is stepping up its multimedia campaign to raise the level of awareness across the country, especially in rural areas where health infrastructure are at their weakest. Meanwhile, the Nigeria Center for Disease Control says there's been no new confirmed case of COVID-19 in the country, but that it is investigating 18 suspected cases. As for the Italian national who's been treated at an isolation facility here in Lagos, the NCDC says he's showing great signs of improvement, asking people to be calm and not to panic at all. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Kenya is ramping up efforts in preparedness to handle cases of the coronavirus in the event of an outbreak. A new isolation and treatment facility in Nairobi was opened on Friday, with the government announcing new measures to contain an outbreak. CG10's Robert Nagila has that report.
Kenya's Cabinet Secretary for Health on a tour of the country's infectious disease unit that will handle any cases of coronavirus infections in case of an outbreak. Set up in the last 7 days following a presidential directive, the facility has 120-bed capacity.
It's not complete yet. There's still work ongoing at this facility. But the government says, should any cases of coronavirus be detected, it has the capacity and capability to handle them.
This is an isolation and treatment facility, and is the only one at the moment that we have around here.
Health officials, however, say, should the need arise, a new referral hospital with a 350-bed capacity at the Kenyatta University in Nairobi is available for use. Working with the African CDC, World Health Organization and the US Center for Disease Control, a national contingency plan focusing on priority and preparedness is being implemented.
We have trained over 1,100 health workers. We have deployed them in Jomo Kenyatta International Airport and other areas. And we are also sensitizing and cascading this training all the way to the community levels.
The Health Ministry says an emergency operations center has been activated, with emergency response teams on standby. Mandatory screening at all border points is also now in effect. Meanwhile, Nairobi has suspended all international conferences and meetings that were to take place in the country and urged Kenyans to postpone non-essential travel to affected countries. Last week, the government suspended flights from Italy and South Korea, but says it allowed in a flight originating from Milan on Friday to evacuate stranded Italian tourists. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Health workers in China have been on the front line battling the coronavirus. Across the world, collective efforts are helping to curb the rate of infection and treating patients. But amidst this push to contain COVID-19, misinformation has been fueling fears.
This is a pushback. The coronavirus outbreak in China has brought out the best and, quite sadly, the worst in some of us. And when the dust finally settles, and it will, there will be heroes and villains. The heroes will be those Chinese doctors and health workers who risked a life and limb on the front line battling to contain the disease. They saved many lives and put the virus on a back foot. They acted selflessly and in the interest of humanity. But this virus has also exposed the primeval instincts in some of us. Here, the media, or at least sections of it, stand accused of being orchestrators and purveyors of misinformation and disinformation. We all know that what we are dealing with here is the coronavirus, or more specifically, COVID-19. There is no such thing as China virus or Wuhan virus, as it has been characterized by sections of the media. In framing the narrative this way, the media is merely playing to the gallery, and through this action of theirs, turning into agents of disinformation and misinformation. By doing this, these sections of media have fallen short on delivering on the cardinal principle of their profession, that of informing and educating and empowering the people, providing them with the requisite information to act and protect themselves. The outcome of this unfortunate campaign of disinformation has been to label, stigmatize, isolate, and ostracize a group of people on the mere account of their origin. As we may now all know, there have been cases of the virus that have no China link. Of course, it is easier to sit on the ivory tower, behind glass windows and doors, and craft newspaper headlines. But it's quite another thing to be on the front line. It is unethical to make a sales pitch out of a tragedy, to sensationalize in order to increase newspaper sales volumes and ratchet up television viewership ratings and online hits. China, as a responsible member of the international community, acted responsibly in the wake of this outbreak, and it continues to do so. It has opened its doors to World Health Organization teams and shared the findings of China's Centers for Disease Control study. On its own volition, without pressure from anywhere or anybody, China has made information available and accessible for all. China's efforts have drawn praise from the World Health Organization, which characterized them as a new standard in global emergency response. The setting up of hospitals, lockdowns, quarantines, the sheer mobilization of frontline personnel have been on an unprecedented scale despite the economic impact to China's economy. In times like this, the world must stand together. Finger-pointing and blame games are not useful. Action saves life, not backpassing. It is time for solidarity, collective efforts, standing with one another, not isolation, stigmatization, and ostracization. Indeed, the coronavirus outbreak has brought out the best and the worst in some of us. Regardless, good will always prevail.
We are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including Cote d'Ivoire president says he won't stand in October election. And Nigeria releases over 200 children after clearing them of suspected links with Boko Haram.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines.
You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
The Interior Ministry in Tunisia has confirmed that a policeman has died from fatal injuries in Friday's suicide blast in the vicinity of the US Embassy in Tunis. 2 terrorists targeted the police checkpoint in the safe area around the embassy. Adnan Chouachi has that story.
The dead officer's body was transported to the forensic department at Charles Nicolle Hospital, while his wounded colleagues were rushed to the emergency unit. In addition, a civilian woman was slightly injured in the face when projectiles hit her vehicle.
I am terrified at the sight of the crime scene. All of a sudden, I heard a huge sound. People ran in all directions because they feared another attack. I'm sad for the policemen.
Many US Marines were deployed on top of the US Embassy to secure the building.
I saw dozens of heavily armed American soldiers on the roof of the embassy, while Tunisians were outside the perimeter. I was terrified at the sight of blood and the body of the terrorist, but I was safe when security forces arrived.
The Counter-Terrorism Judicial Division is in charge of the investigation into the suicide bombing. The Public Prosecutor's Office, the Technical Police Brigade and security units rushed to the scene of the terrorist attack to take the samples.
The National Counter-Terrorism Unit has been entrusted with following up the investigation in order to identify, in cooperation with the forensic laboratories, the perpetrators of the suicide attack and their accomplices. This attack will not destabilize the state.
The head of state said the policeman killed in Friday's suicide blast is Second Lieutenant Tawfiq Mohammed Misawi. He is a member of the Internal Security Forces. The Interior Ministry announced that the 2 terrorists are 27 and 29 years old. They were born and raised in the neighborhoods of La Marsa and Lekram in the north of the capital city, Tunis. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
And in Afghanistan, at least 27 people have been killed after gunmen opened fire during a memorial ceremony in the capital, Kabul. Dozens had gathered to mark the anniversary of the death of a Shia leader. The country's chief executive and several other leaders escaped unharmed. This is the deadliest attack since a peace deal was signed between the Taliban and the United States last week. Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the attack.
Individuals in military uniform targeted people. They were casualties, dead and wounded.
Zambian President Edgar Lungu has called out church leaders for inciting reprisal attacks. The latest attacks have left at least 50 people dead. They were in response to an earlier incident where chemicals were being sprayed on people's homes and public institutions. The chemical attacks began in December and were initially confined to the mineral-rich Copperbelt, but have since spread to the capital, Lusaka. And in Cote d'Ivoire, President Alassane Ouattara says he will not be seeking another term in the upcoming October elections. Local leaders on all sides have welcomed his announcement. This ends speculation on Ouattara's political future after he previously showed an interest in seeking a third term. His decision leaves the field open for new entrants, with some analysts saying that the incumbent might back his Prime Minister, Amadou Gon Coulibaly. However, Coulibaly is seen by many as lacking the political charisma to win in the polls. Former presidents Laurent Gbagbo and Henri Konan Bédié have not indicated their interest in the country's top seat. Ouattara was sworn in 2010 after a brief civil war that followed Gbagbo's refusal to concede defeat.
I wish to announce solemnly that I have decided not to be candidate in the presidential election. I want to transfer power to a younger generation.
Hundreds of children in Nigeria have been released by authorities after being cleared of suspected ties with the militant group Boko Haram. UNICEF says Boko Haram has recruited and used children in its operations since 2012. Ifeok Etang reports from Jos in northern Nigeria.
The United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, says that 223 children, including 10 girls, were released from the Nigerian Army administrative custody and a maximum security prison in Maiduguri after being cleared of ties with armed groups. The children were released to UNICEF, the State Ministry of Women Affairs and Social Development, and the state authorities in Maiduguri, northeastern Nigeria. UNICEF's Borno State Communication Officer, Samuel Kalu, says following the release, the children will be enrolled in a reintegration program to enable them to properly reunite with their families. He added that some of the children were reported to have been missing for up to 4 and 5 years, with many already presumed dead by their families. UNICEF's country representative, Peter Hopkins, describes the release of the children as a major step towards securing the well-being of children in the conflict area. The United Nations says that more than 1,700 children associated with armed groups have been released to the Nigerian Army administrative custody since 2017. Nigeria has waged a 10-year-long battle against an insurgency that has claimed more than 30,000 lives and displaced hundreds of thousands of children, women, and men. President Buhari has said that in the coming weeks, his administration will begin an aggressive campaign to deal with Boko Haram once and for all. Ifeok Etang, CGTN, Jos, Nigeria.
Meanwhile, the US government has said it is ready to pay $7 million to anyone with information that will lead to the arrest of Abu Bakr Shekau, the leader of Boko Haram. Over the past decade, the Islamist group has carried out attacks that have claimed the lives of thousands. Correspondent Phil Hazer has more on the terrorist leader and Nigeria's efforts to stop his attacks.
Abu Bakr Shekau, born in Yobe State, northeast Nigeria, became the leader of Boko Haram after the death of its founder in 2009. The group Boko Haram forbids Western education and are bent on carving out an Islamic state of their own. 45-year-old Shekau has led Boko Haram to carry out repeated deadly attacks and abductions in Nigeria.
You have an insurgency that is primarily caused by religious extremism and has festered around countries with poor state control. You have weak governance structure such that you have large swaths of land across this region that are ungoverned, as well as millions of lives that are also without government presence.
In 2014, Shekau directed the group to kidnap over 270 schoolgirls from a Chibok community in Borno State, and although many of the girls escaped and some were rescued by the military, 112 of them are yet to be found. By 2015, Shekau had pledged allegiance to the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. The U.S. Department of State, through its Rewards for Justice program, says it is offering millions of dollars for information that will lead to the arrest of Shekau. But security analysts say that alone may not help in tackling the war against insurgency in Nigeria.
There has to be a collaboration between the government and the Muslim community around the Sahel to roll back some of these extremist doctrines that are only found in mainstream Muslim theology. And until there's a rollback, what you find is that for every insurgent that is mowed down on the battlefield, there are tens, if not hundreds, of replacements willingly.
The government says Boko Haram has been decimated since 2015 and a mop-up operation is being carried out on the fringes of the northeast and Lake Chad region.
The military is carrying out the final
activity exercises in the Sambisa forest, which is the last foothold that the insurgents had.
But there's still been several cases of violence carried out since then by the militant group in Nigeria.
President Muhammadu Buhari reiterated his commitment to ending insurgency and restoring peace in the country after being re-elected last year for his second and final term. But the former military ruler may have a lot to prove in fishing out the terrorists and producing some kind of quick fix to end the campaign of terror. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Now, Rama has all the business news for you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Here's what's coming up in business. 5 Kenyan banks fined nearly $4 million for failing to report suspicious transactions. And Nigeria Senate has approved President Muhammadu Buhari's request to borrow almost $23 billion. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Kenya's central bank has fined 5 banks, a total of $3.75 million, for failing to report suspicious transactions under anti-money laundering laws. Those banks include KCB Group, Equity, Cooperative Bank of Kenya, Standard Chartered and Diamond Trust, all of those essentially Tier 1 players. The allegations stem from the theft of nearly $100 million, which was part of the National Youth Service scandal some 5 years ago. Investigations by the prosecutors revealed that the lenders failed to put in place adequate systems to combat money laundering. In 2018, the central bank also fined the same banks nearly $4 million for failing to report suspicious transactions. Over in West Africa, Nigerian lawmakers have approved President Muhammadu Buhari's plan to borrow $22.7 billion, and all of that is aimed at funding key infrastructure projects. The Senate gave its endorsement to look for the funding from the Islamic Development Bank, the African Development Bank, and the World Bank as well. It's also set to secure funding from external bilateral creditors, including China, Japan, and Germany. The sale of a $3.3 billion Eurobond this year is expected to refinance an existing debt and fund its budget of about $35 billion. Africa's largest economy has been struggling with the effects of an economic contraction that has hindered economic development. Elsewhere, South Africans are gearing up for yet another tough year. As the economy continues to weaken, GDP data out this week confirmed that South Africa slipped into a technical recession in the last quarter of 2019. This is the second recession in just 2 years. Power supply constraints have become the biggest hurdle to growth in the country. Here's CGTN's Sumitra Naidu with this report.
The ongoing power cuts in South Africa are weighing heavily on economic activity, and it's adding to already existing problems in the country. Instead, the government continues to fund ailing state-owned entities and has thus far failed to hold anyone accountable for corruption that has dragged South Africa into an abyss.
We have to have some structural reform. It's certain that you cannot carry on as a government right now and pump in that much money into the enterprises that government owns. So we have to find ways where they stand on their own 2 feet, because we have over 10 million people unemployed.
It hasn't been an easy ride for President Cyril Ramaphosa. The ANC remains divided, unemployment is at record highs, and the country is on the brink of being downgraded to junk.
We also have the international problem of the coronavirus, which will impact on us. And our biggest trading partner is China. 15% of all our trade is with China, both exports and imports. And I think also the downgrade, is likely to happen. And one is concerned that this downgrade is going to come really at the wrong time for South Africa.
Some analysts are warning that this recession could drag on for some time
unless the ANC makes some drastic decisions and changes policy and structural reforms.
There's more concern around the lack of policy implementation.
So I would not encourage them to rewrite anything. So whatever's already been crafted, whatever has already been committed to by the various social partners and even the alliance partners, execute on it, and only once you've done that, tell us that this is the reason it hasn't worked. But to simply spend every single year, every single term, every single administration writing things that are never going to be executed is not going to get us anywhere.
It's not clear if there will be a plan to improve the situation.
I think at this stage we're hoping that they will be able to put some efforts into doing something, but in the absence of a clear intervention that is not based on broad abstract principles, but rather key issues, key indicators that you're going to tackle within particular timelines, that's what we need to see, and I'm not sure if we're going to see it.
In the meantime, South Africans will have to tighten their belts, clear debt, hold on to their jobs, and save for more rainy days. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Economies on the continent will have to invest a lot more in skills and infrastructure if they are to fully benefit from the fourth industrial revolution. Business leaders at a digital conference in Johannesburg discussed the hurdles that are faced by South Africa. The continent's most industrialized economy has started to make moves towards being a much smarter economy, but it lags behind more developed nations. Here's CGTN's Angela Coppola with this report.
South Africa's workplace is changing, smarter factories and businesses are emerging. The lack of critical skills, however, was highlighted by business leaders at a Johannesburg conference as one of the biggest stumbling blocks to a digital future.
When you talk 4IR, the critical skills, like whether you talk data scientist, artificial intelligence, robotics, it requires people who understand science, who understand engineering, who understand mathematics. We need to make sure that we equip our kids to be able to compete for those things.
We have to get robotics coding into primary school, into early childhood learning. However, at the same time, we have to ensure that we do not put the bar so low to be 30%, 33%. And that will ensure that if we raise those, then we raise the level of aptitude for these kids from an early age.
Despite a slower economy, companies are investing in technology and softer skills. But many South Africans and smaller businesses have not fully grasped what the fourth industrial revolution means for them.
There's a bulk of people who do not know what it is all about. Some of those who know are afraid of it because they see it as coming to replace their jobs. So the role of government is really to help people to understand it. But let's be honest, there will be some casualties. And it's a function of new technology. I suppose when we invented cars, those people who were manufacturing horseshoes were out of a job, so that will still be the case.
4IR has the potential to create smarter cities and mega industries. Agriculture, health, transport, and everyday services are already seeing transformation. But progress will depend on enabling policies, upgraded infrastructure, and a reliable power supply. Another challenge for South Africa.
Cornerstone of unlocking the fourth industrial revolution is the internet. A cornerstone of the internet is electricity. A cornerstone of electricity is connectivity and infrastructure. So all of these things ladder up. The role of government is not only to get involved in conversations around being able to liberate discussions around data access, privacy, etc., etc. It also means that they have to follow through with requisite investments into being able to provide connectivity.
President Cyril Ramaphosa has identified the fourth industrial revolution as a key component in creating inclusive growth in South Africa. But the country will have to balance a mountain of socio-economic challenges, such as poverty and unemployment, with technological advancements. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
The Southern African Development Community has set out measures that are designed to improve the labour market in the region. This comes after a three-day meeting between labour and employment ministers from the bloc in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Now, unemployment across the region has slowed down economic development, and the rate is currently standing at anywhere between 9 and 11%. Compare that to a global level of 5.1%.
Katika kujenga urafiki
In building friendship and regional cooperation, along with this launch, delegates will have a chance to visit and see the success of the National Internship Program for Tanzania's youth. This program has helped many young people prepare to enter the job market.
Kuwepo kwa programu ya taifa ya kukuza ujuzi.
Ni dhahiri kwamba
Tunahitaji kukua kwa teknolojia na matumizi yake.
It's obvious that we need to grow and use technology, but technology is taking a large percentage of work initially done by people. Technology is only good when it creates new employment, not when it reduces human labor.
Matumizi ya nguvu kazi.
China's government is set to implement preferential policies that are aimed at supporting the transport sector. Now, at least this should help reduce losses incurred as businesses are struggling to adapt to the recent coronavirus outbreak. The Transportation Ministry says the sector is reeling from a significant decline in both passenger and cargo traffic. Authorities across the country are now expected to give subsidies to businesses in a bid to boost financial support for the public sector. To ensure the implementation of these policies, the ministry is encouraging authorities, for example, to temporarily exempt taxi drivers from car rent. In addition, a toll-free policy has been executed to benefit the large number of truck drivers.
From March 1 to June 30, all port construction charges for import and export cargoes will be waived. Government said prices like way dues and port facilities security fee will be cut by 20%. Mandatory emergency response services and charges for non-tanker carriers will be cancelled. Railway issued fee, demurrage cost fee for containers, and truck retention fee will be cut by half until the end of June. Transportation and logistics enterprises which perform emergency transportation tasks will receive fiscal compensation from governments at various levels if they offer government-procured public services. Those key enterprises participating in the transport of important medical supplies and living necessities will also be entitled to loans and preferential interest rates.
And I'll leave it there for the time being. I'll be back at the top of the hour, though. We'll be looking at a G77 meeting. It was scheduled to take place in Uganda. It's now been postponed due to COVID-19. We'll look at the economic fallout from this pathogen when we come back at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, back to Karen.
Thank you very much, Rama. We are now going to break. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including Zimbabwean sculptor chisels his way to global prominence.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Cote, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
In Zimbabwe, an artist's stone carvings have earned him a place on the global map. Dominic Ben-Hur's pieces have been displayed in the United States, Australia and Italy. As CGTN's Wilkisa Nyabwa reports, it began as just a hobby.
Zimbabwe might be going through tough economic times, but for Dominic Ben-Hur, carving a living out of stone literally is what brings him joy and fortune.
It started as a hobby when I was creating as a little boy with clay, but I still treat it as a hobby and try anything which comes to my mind. Because once you start chasing dollars, you're not going to make it. You might produce, then if it doesn't sell, then you are discouraged. You see? So I just treat it as a hobby. If it sells, it's a bonus. As long as inside my soul, I'm happy with what I would have tried to achieve.
Ben-Hur is one of the few artists who are keeping the famous traditional art that is based on the history of the great Zimbabwe. Unlike previous artists, he has added what he calls motion to his carvings, giving the final products an air that celebrates life and happy moments.
I celebrate life. With my figures, they are very happy. It could be mothers and children, or children themselves, or dancing girls. But I also do animals and plants. from my own mind. I see it, then I create. Sometimes I try and put color into it to make it colorful, yes.
In 40 years, Ben-Hura has managed to metaphorically carve his space on the global art scene and taken it upon himself to place the Southern African nation's art in big capitals.
We hardly have as many pieces in museums. Why? Because in Africa we don't have our own museums. So you find all the artists we have got works in overseas. In museums, they are very few. Why? If you were born in France and you are good, then all the museums in France will collect your work.
He now runs his own permanent exhibitions in Atlanta, Colorado, Victoria Museum in Melbourne, Australia, and in Siena, Italy. His works of art have also enabled him to purchase his own home in the outskirts of Harare. It is a big achievement for the man who was born and grew up miles away in Murewa, northeast of the capital. Wilkes Anyabwa, CGTN.
All of the sport coming up after the break, including Mamelodi Sundowns gear up for uphill battle against Egyptian giants Al Ahly.